Joining me now from Capitol Hill is James Glassman, a visiting fellow of the American Enterprise Institute, also the founding executive director of the George W. Bush Institute. He also served as U.S. Undersecretary of State for Public Diplomacy in the George W. Bush administration. And he once hosted a little program called The Capitol Gang when we were all together in the glorious days at CNN. How are you, James?
I'm great, Larry. Great to talk to you.
Great to talk to you, too. The FBI and the U.S. counterterrorism officials are sounding the alarm about an ISIS social media machine. Now, you pushed the State Department, as I remember it, to bring Internet technology to bear on American outreach efforts. How do you rate what the Islamic extremists are doing?
Well, unfortunately, I think they're doing a very good job. I don't think we want to exaggerate it. It's not that easy to actually recruit terrorists online, but they certainly can provide them with lots of information. So it's something, it's scary, and you know, I'm worried that the United States, is not doing enough to push back online and elsewhere against this threat.
How do you police the internet?
I don't think you can police the internet. I do think the one thing about the internet, though, is there are lots and lots of voices. And when you recruit a terrorist, what you want to do is keep that terrorist isolated and bombard him or her with images, with exhortations. And so what we need to do is actually start talking about the other side, talking about freedom, talking about other possibilities for these people's lives. But you really can't isolate them from hearing things on the internet, watching things.
So you have to combat with an American message.
Exactly right. Exactly right. And it's not just an American message, I want to emphasize. You know, I think that the values of tolerance and freedom and respect, these are global values. They're not just American values, but absolutely. And I also think that sometimes Americans aren't the best messengers. That's one of the things that I certainly did when I was at the State Department. I was more intent on getting others to give these messages rather than just Americans.
With all that's happening, the internet, the technological explosion, are you optimistic or pessimistic about where this is all going?
I think in the long run, I am definitely optimistic, but I'm worried that the United States has been stepping back from its leadership position. So I don't think that the internet doesn't change a whole lot. I mean, it's a much better way to communicate, no doubt about that, much faster, maybe not better, but faster way to communicate. But I think America has got a lead, and I don't think that's been happening recently.
Why?
That seems to be the preference of the president, and I can understand it to some extent. We got involved in some places that became very difficult. A lot of Americans died, so there is a natural response to pull back. But I think that we live in a world in which we really can't pull back. Even if we'd like to, we need to take a leadership position. So we'll see what happens in 2016, but I think that the experience of the last 6 years has taught Americans that we have a role in the world and we need to play it. Doesn't mean we need to intervene everywhere, but we need to be leaders. We can't lead from behind.
You recently wrote a terrific article titled Presidents All Around Us. Before we get into it, explain your title.
Well, what I said in the article was that Americans should understand that we're not constrained by what the parties throw up as potential leaders. So what we have right now from the Democrats and the Republicans are names that we've heard before: Clinton, Bush, and then people who tend to be on the extremes. What I'm saying is that there are, across this vast land, dozens of people who would make good and perhaps even great presidents. Many of them are not affiliated with the parties. Many of them couldn't pass a party litmus test on something like abortion or gay rights or taxes. Many of them are independents themselves, but they can't get elected president because of the rules about who can participate in a presidential debate. So I would like to open up the presidential debates, and if we did, then some of the people that I mentioned in my article, I think, could become president of the United States.
He wrote a terrific article called Presidents All Around Us. Some years back, Esquire magazine did a story along these lines of men who would make great presidents. They included Edward Bennett Williams, the great lawyer, major leaders but the thesis was none of these people, men or women, would ever run because of what it takes to run a political campaign. They'd be best suited to run the country, but not suited to run for office.
You know, it's interesting you should mention that Esquire article, because I remember that was many, many years ago, but it made a big impression on me. And that was one of the reasons I wanted to do the article that I did. Yes, it's difficult to run for president. There's no doubt about that. But I do think there are lots of people in the United States who are willing to go through the process of being elected president. The problem is that unless they go through the party primaries, they're not going to get and get nominated. They're not going to get in the debates. And of course, you know, Ross Perot declared for president on your show, Larry,
right.
And he was the last person, the last independent to get into the presidential debates. They have since, after Ross Perot got into the debates, and by the way, those were the best watched debates ever, the 1992 debates. After that, they changed the rules to make it more difficult for a independent or third-party candidate to get in the debates. So I'm part of a group a very informal group, but it includes some interesting people like General Hayden, the former head of the CIA, Joe Lieberman, John Huntsman, who are trying to get the Presidential Debate Commission to change its rules to make it more easier for somebody to enter the debates who's not a Democrat or a Republican. And as my article said, I think there are lots of good people out there.
But how do you get them? Because they're going to say, I don't need this. I mean, I can run the Coca-Cola company, but I don't want to go to Iowa and shake hands with people and raise money.
Right. Well, they may not have to participate. They certainly don't have to go through the Republican or Democratic primaries, although they would have to get out and get signatures to get on the ballot in all the states, and that's tough. But still, you want that kind of person to be president. But you also want somebody who's a leader, who's got experience. So my article, I talk about people like Admiral McRaven. I think he's a good example. So he was the guy who planned the raid against bin Laden, planned literally hundreds of such activities, a four-star admiral. He is now the head of the University of Texas system with more than 200,000 students, 80,000 faculty members. He knows how to run a large institution, very respected. Or, you know, Mike Bloomberg. What about Mike Bloomberg? He could never get nominated by the Democrats or the Republicans, but he could be a very good president. Did a great job with New York.
Boy, wouldn't he? David Rubenstein, incredible guy.
Yep. David Rubenstein, not only a great leader of a business, but also one of the great philanthropists in America. Or Ellen Kullman, who's the CEO of DuPont. Or I tell you who else I mentioned on there, and I work for her, so maybe I'm prejudiced, but Condi Rice. Now, she could never get nominated by the Republican Party because she is pro-choice on abortion.
Right.
But she would make an excellent president. So I think there are, as I said, I think there are dozens of people like that. And the key is actually getting them into the debates. Because if you're not in the debates, you can't get elected president of the United States.
But since the parties control the rules, how do you change this?
Well, the parties do control the rules, and they control the rules through something that a lot of people don't know about called the Commission on Presidential Debates, which, believe it or not, is a nonpartisan supposedly nonpartisan organization that's actually run by the former head of the Republican Party, Frank Fahrenkopf, very nice guy, but certainly very partisan, and Mike McCurry, who's also a very nice guy, but a Democratic activist, former press secretary to President Clinton. So this is an organization that wants to maintain the status quo, which is Republican debating against a Democrat. What we're saying is Americans would like to see another possibility. More than 60% of Americans, Larry, say that they would vote for an independent, if that independent were a good candidate. So they're open to doing that. And that's what we need. We need another candidate who would, if that person doesn't get elected, at least that person would have an influence on the Democrat and the Republican.
So Perot should have changed things for the better. Instead, they went back in reverse, right?
Absolutely. And you can see why. I mean, Perot got, what, 18, 19% of the vote. He scared the two parties.
He was ahead in the polls.
He was ahead in the polls. Then he dropped out,
right,
as you remember. Then, before the election, he was polling 8%. Then, when the debates happened, he went way up in the polls, and he ended up 18, 19%. So the Democrats and the Republicans, the party operatives, they don't want that to happen again. They don't want to see, Admiral McRaven or another guy, Admiral James Stavridis, who's former Supreme Allied Commander in Europe and is now running the Fletcher School at Tufts. He has a PhD. He knows how to run a large organization, a fantastic American. There are all sorts of people like that out there. Some are CEOs, some are military, some are, current or former political people, and they're there. We don't have to settle for what the parties are giving us, but we need to make that change.
Do we have a change the rule campaign?
We do. So there are about 4 dozen of us who have written a letter to the commission on presidential debates, and we are going to further apply pressure. Unfortunately, it is this unelected group that's going to be able to make the decisions. Now, the Federal Election Commission should get involved in this, and we have encouraged them, at least I've encouraged them to do that, and we'll see if that happens. But you're going to see the pressure mount because Americans want another choice, an additional choice.
James, in your opinion, how much do the debates matter in the presidential campaign?
Tremendously, tremendous amount. You cannot get elected president of the United States unless you're in the debates for this simple reason that the debates validate a candidate. They're what determine whether a candidate is authentic or not. And they reach millions and millions of Americans. You and I and people in Washington may be interested now, and we're all talking about, who's going to run and what they're going to stand for and all that. But most Americans don't begin to concentrate on the presidential elections until the summer or, in fact, in many cases, the early fall of election year. So those debates are really important when they occur. They are absolutely essential.
Other things in politics, the Supreme Court decision, which makes money, you can raise, this campaign's going to be $1 billion each.
Yes.
That's crazy.
Look, it is crazy. And we've done surveys, and we're not the only ones, that show that 7 out of 8 Americans believe that the political system is broken. I mean, most Americans believe that. We've got way too much partisanship. People in Congress can't get together. It's all just blaming the other side. So how can we change that? Yes. There is a problem with the financing system for elections. There's a problem with the way we divide up the country for congressional districts, the gerrymandering. There's no doubt about that. And there's a problem, I think, with the attitude of a lot of people in Congress and even in the White House. But those are difficult to change. The one thing we can change is to open up the presidential debates, to breathe some fresh air into our political system. That can be done, and it really only takes the 17 people who are on this commission to understand they are at the crossroads of history and they ought to make that decision.
I salute you, James. I think someday it might happen.
Thank you, Larry.
You've been a journalist, a publisher. You were president of the Atlantic Monthly, publisher of the New Republic, executive vice president of U.S. News and World Report, editor and co-owner of Roll Call. What's happened to print? Where is print in the campaign stories in America?
Print is really in the throes of a revolution, and I think one of the problems with print these days is that, with very few exceptions, print has really pared back its coverage.
Yeah.
It's reporting. What I find, Larry, is that so much of what passes for journalism today is kind of people doing a riff on smaller and smaller amount of actual news, and so we need more news coverage. I don't know how it's going to settle out, and I don't want to sound like an old fogey. Obviously, I understand what's happening with these changes. I tried to, when I was at the State Department, really bring our communications for the U.S. government into a new age, but I'm more concerned about news gathering and the kind of the principles that I grew up with when I was learning how to be a reporter. I worry that some of that is being lost. A lot of it's being lost.
On a political issue, James Messina, the former Obama aide, he helped the Conservative Party stay in power in London. He worked over there for quite some time. He told BuzzFeed News that Hillary Clinton, rather than the Republican Party, should be taking heart from the recent British elections. According to Messina, David Cameron is a progressive leader. He pushed for gay marriage, world climate change, and that's in line with what Hillary's going to go with, while the Republicans appeared opposed to that in that area.
Well, I would actually, the comment I would make about that is that, in this country, in Britain there are a lot of different parties. In this country, we've got two parties, and unfortunately, both the parties have some pretty strong litmus tests. So I would say, I know there are a lot of people, I'm one of them, who are, let's say, pro-freedom on the social side and also on the economic side. So, I'm pro-gay marriage. I think gay people ought to be able to get married. I'm pro-choice on the abortion issue. I'm for a better system so that immigrants can come to America and be legal. But I'm also in favor of low taxes, low regulation. In other words, I'm for social freedom and I'm for economic freedom. And the truth is, there's no party for me. So
you're lost.
But I think there are a lot of Americans who are like that. And so, why not have another choice? And it might be a choice like what I'm talking about. It might be a completely different kind of choice. But I think we just need to open the system up.
You wrote in Politico, perhaps because of what's happened over the past 6 years, Americans believe that executive experience in or out of government is more important than stands on issues. So therefore, that would not make you a big fan of Obama, nor a big fan of Rubio, right?
I am concerned about people who become president, which is the United States government's the largest institution in the world, and that don't have executive experience. I'm not saying that you might not, a particular person might not turn out to be a really good leader of a large organization. That can happen. But I would rather have a president who has had that kind of experience. There are now three declared candidates on the Republican side who are freshman senators. Now, we just had a freshman senator as president. He's the current president. And while, there are a lot of things to like about President Obama, I think that most Americans would agree that his leadership skills leave something to be desired. And there are lots of people in the United States that know how to run large organizations. Alan Mulally of Ford, I think you know him, has done a fabulous job with a very large company. And he turned down the bailout money. He's running a great company. And it's not that he doesn't have, CEOs today have good political skills. CEOs of multinational corporations, they have to have political skills. They spend a lot of time in Washington for better or worse. So I would look at people like that.
James, you make so much sense. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Larry. Appreciate it.